I used to think my life was nothing more than a cruel joke written by fate. Growing up, I was always the outsider, the unwanted shadow in a house that was never mine. My stepmother smiled in public, but behind closed doors, her eyes were filled with something darker than hate. She didn't just dislike me, she wanted me gone. And I never knew why. Until the day the truth unraveled like a thread pulled from an old, forgotten secret, and everything I thought I knew about myself shattered. I still remember the first time she looked at me and flinched, as if my very existence offended her. I was only 8 when Dad remarried. He held my hand so tightly at the wedding that I couldn't feel my fingers. And beside him, she stood radiant in white lace, her smile perfect, practiced. I wanted to believe she would love me. Or at least pretend. But the night they returned from their honeymoon, things changed. Her warm voice turned cold when she spoke to me. My toys mysteriously disappeared. I was moved to a small room at the end of the hallway, the maid's old quarters. I asked my dad why, but he just patted my head and said, "It's just temporary." Temporary turned into years. She didn't hit me. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she slowly erased me, from photos, from family dinners, from the warmth of belonging. She made sure I felt like a burden. Like I was the constant reminder of a past she wanted to bury. I once caught her staring at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. It wasn't just hatred in her eyes. It was confusion, and something else I couldn't name back then. The worst part? My father didn't see it. Or maybe he chose not to. He worked late. Traveled often. And every time he left, I braced myself for the silence that filled the house when it was just her and me. That silence screamed louder than any slap ever could. By the time I turned 16, I had mastered the art of disappearing. I made no noise when I walked. I avoided eye contact. I barely ate. I thought if I could make myself small enough, maybe she'd forget to hate me. But that's not what happened. Instead, her cruelty evolved, calculated and subtle. She tampered with my school applications. Told my teachers I was emotionally unstable. She even flirted with the idea of sending me to boarding school in another country. I knew she wanted me gone, but I never understood why. Until that day at the hospital. It began with a car accident. Minor, really. A distracted driver, a slippery road, and suddenly I was waking up in a white room with a throbbing head and dried blood at my temple. My dad rushed in, frantic and teary-eyed. And behind him, her. Pale. Frozen. She didn't speak. Just stood there, staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. The nurse came in with a clipboard and said something that changed everything. "The results are in. Her blood type doesn't match yours, Mr. Williams. Are you sure she's your biological daughter?" I froze. My dad turned pale. And my stepmother, she dropped her purse, lips trembling. That moment was the beginning of the end. My dad stumbled back into the chair, his face hollowed by shock. That can't be right," he muttered, gripping the edge of the bed as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. "There must be a mistake." The nurse offered an awkward smile, clearly uncomfortable. "It happens more often than you'd think. Maybe you want to double-check with her birth records?" My breath caught. My pulse raced. I had always believed he was my real father. He raised me. Called me his little girl. And yet, everything about my life suddenly felt like it had been built on sand. But it wasn't his reaction that haunted me, it was hers. My stepmother. She didn't cry. She didn't look shocked. She didn't even ask questions. She just stood there, her eyes locked onto me, and for the first time in my life, she looked afraid. Not angry. Afraid. That night, I overheard them fighting. I pressed my ear to the door, heart pounding. "She's not mine, Susan. If she's not mine, whose is she?" "I don't know," her voice cracked. "I don't know, okay? Maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe she was never supposed to be ours." Lies. I could hear it in her voice. She did know. And she was hiding something. Something big. I should have been angry. I should have screamed. But all I felt was numb. A strange, creeping numbness that made everything around me feel like a dream. For the next few days, things got even weirder. She watched me constantly, like she was studying me. Like I was some puzzle she was trying to solve. She hovered outside my room, startled every time I caught her there. She even started being nice. Offering me tea. Bringing me fruit. Sitting beside me on the couch like nothing had ever happened. And I played along. I smiled. I nodded. I even thanked her. Because deep down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was hiding the truth, and the only way to get it was to wait for her to slip. And she did. Late one night, I heard her on the phone. No. I don't know how they found out. The hospital ran blood work and now it's all unraveling. A pause. Then, a whisper so soft, I had to hold my breath to hear it. She looks just like me when I was young. My stomach twisted. She was supposed to be gone forever. The orphanage said she died. They told me she died. My world shattered. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I just stood there, in the dark hallway, listening to the woman who had tormented me for a decade, whispering about how she had once believed I was dead. Not her stepdaughter. Not a stranger. Her child. Her biological daughter. I wanted to burst into the room and demand answers, but something inside me stopped. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was years of being ignored, overlooked, unloved. Or maybe I just needed time to process the cruel irony of it all. She hated me. She made my life hell. And all this time, she was my mother. I didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. Because knowing the truth didn't make it better. It made it worse. I avoided her for the next few days. I couldn't look at her without feeling sick, at everything she'd done, everything I'd been through, and the bitter truth that now chained us together in blood. She kept trying to approach me. Knocking gently on my door. Leaving food outside like some twisted act of motherly concern. Whispering my name as if it held warmth between her lips. But it didn't. Not for me. I wanted to hate her. God, I should have hated her. But instead, I just felt empty. Like something inside me had been ripped away and no one could ever put it back. One evening, as I stood on the back porch staring at the dying light, she came up behind me. "You heard me that night, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I didn't respond. She sighed, and for the first time ever, her voice cracked with something that sounded like pain. "They told me you died. I was 17. My parents, your grandparents, they forced me into a clinic when I got pregnant. I begged to keep you. I wanted to hold you just once. But they said you were gone right after birth." I clenched my fists. My nails dug into my palms. I could hear my blood roaring in my ears. "So you thought I was dead," I said, still not looking at her. "And when I showed up in your life again, by some twist of fate, you treated me like garbage." "I didn't know," she cried, stepping forward. "You don't understand. I had no idea it was you." "But you knew something," I snapped, turning to face her. "You knew I didn't belong to Dad. You felt it, didn't you? That's why you hated me." She blinked, lips trembling. "You looked like her. Like the girl I used to be. And I couldn't bear it. Every time I looked at you, I remembered what I lost." I stared at her, eyes burning. "So you punished me for it?" Tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "I did. And I will never forgive myself for it." For a moment, everything went quiet between us. Just the soft hum of cicadas in the night. I saw her there, no longer the sharp, cold woman who had loomed over my childhood, but a broken shell of someone who had buried her guilt so deep, it had turned into poison. "I hated you," I admitted. For so long. I thought you were just evil. Cruel. A woman who hated me for being born. But now, I realize you hated yourself even more. She collapsed onto the porch steps, clutching her chest like she couldn't breathe. Every time I looked at you, something twisted inside me. I thought it was resentment, but it was grief. I sat beside her, unsure of what I was doing. My hands still shook. My heart was a mess. But a strange part of me, some quiet, fragile part, ached for her. For the girl she had once been. For the mother I never had. Why didn't you try to find me? I asked. They told me you were cremated. There was no record. I thought I'd buried you. And I believed her. Because pain like that, it couldn't be faked. I don't know what to do now, she whispered. How can I ever make this right? I looked out into the night sky, searching for answers I didn't have. I don't know, I said honestly. But maybe, we start by telling Dad the truth. Her eyes widened in panic. No, he'll hate me. He deserves to know, I said. And so do I. Because secrets might bury the past, but they always rise again. And I was tired of living in the shadows. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. My father was sitting at the dining table, reading the newspaper like it was any other day, his cup of coffee steaming in his hands. The clinking of his spoon echoed in the silence. I walked in first. She followed me a few steps behind, her breath shallow, like every inch toward him was a mile of guilt. Dad, I said, my voice trembling just enough for him to notice. He looked up immediately, concerned. There's something we need to talk about. His eyes shifted between me and her. What's going on? She opened her mouth, but no words came. I could see it all, her fear, her shame, her instinct to lie again. But this time, she didn't get to hide. I'm not your daughter, I said softly. Not by blood. The spoon dropped from his hand and clattered against the saucer. What? He whispered. I turned to her. Tell him. Tell him everything. She stood frozen, her fingers clutching the edge of the chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. And then, in one exhale, she began. I was 17, she said. I got pregnant. My parents were furious. They locked me away until I gave birth. Then they told me, the baby died. I never even got to hold her. My father just stared at her, like he was looking at a stranger. She continued. When I met you, years later, I never told you. I never thought it would matter. And then, she showed up. Your daughter, you said. A child from a one-night stand you didn't even remember. He blinked, confusion spreading across his face. I thought her mother died in childbirth. She didn't, I said. At least not in any file I've seen. But what matters is, my blood type doesn't match yours. We did the test at the hospital. The silence was crushing. I think I was adopted, I said. And somehow I ended up here. With you. With her. My father leaned back in his chair, the weight of the truth breaking over him like a wave. Are you saying, you're her daughter? She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Yes. She's mine. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just rubbed his face with both hands, like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. So all these years, he finally said, his voice brittle, you treated her like trash. And she was your daughter? I didn't know, she said weakly. But you felt it, he snapped. Didn't you? On some level, you must have known. No one hates a child that much without reason. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the chair beside him. I didn't want to believe it. Because if she was really mine, then that means I hurt my own child. My baby. And I couldn't live with that. The room fell quiet again. Until I spoke. I don't want revenge, I said. I don't want apologies you don't mean. I just want honesty. No more secrets. My father looked at me, eyes glassy. You will always be my daughter. Blood or not. You hear me? I nodded, trying not to cry. And you, he turned to her. You need to earn your place in her life. If she lets you. She nodded through the tears, too broken to speak. That day marked the beginning of something new. Not healing, at least not yet. But honesty. And honesty was a start. That night, I sat by myself on the porch, watching the stars. Wondering how many stories in this world are like mine, twisted, cruel, unbelievable. And yet somehow, real. I thought she was my enemy. But she was my mother. And now, we were two broken women, trying to rebuild something we never even had to begin with. Days passed, then weeks. The house was quieter than before, not the kind of silence filled with tension or hatred, but something heavier. Something uncertain. Like we were all holding our breath, afraid to exhale too soon. She tried. I'll give her that. She knocked on my door every morning with breakfast. Sometimes it was too early. Sometimes the toast was burnt. But she tried. She'd linger in the doorway, eyes soft, unsure whether she was allowed to smile. Sometimes, I let her in. Most days, I didn't. And yet, a strange ache began to grow in my chest. The same woman who used to look at me like I was filth, now flinched every time I avoided her gaze. She never asked for forgiveness, not directly, but her actions were screaming it. One rainy afternoon, we sat across from each other on the living room couch. I could hear the ticking of the clock behind us, steady like a heartbeat. I found this in the attic, she said quietly, placing a small, worn box between us. Inside was a faded baby blanket. Pink, frayed at the edges. Embroidered in the corner, the name Leah. My parents had it made when I was pregnant, she said, voice trembling. I wanted to name you Leah. But they told me you died before I could sign the birth certificate. I stared at the blanket like it was a relic from someone else's life. But the name felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. I think that is my name, I whispered. At the orphanage, before they called me Anna, there was a nurse. She always called me Liao when no one was looking. Her breath caught. And for the first time since the hospital, she reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time, two strangers bound by blood, pain, and 1,000 unspoken words. But maybe that was enough for now. Until the letter arrived. It came in a pale blue envelope, no return address. My name, Liao Williams, was written in neat, almost familiar handwriting. Inside was a single page. Typed. You were never supposed to find her. She was taken for a reason. Leave it alone, or you'll regret it. My heart stopped. I read it twice. Then a third time. When I showed it to her, her hands trembled. No one knew except my parents, she whispered. No one but them, and the midwife. And that's when something shifted. This wasn't just about a lost child or a stolen past. Someone didn't want me found. Someone had buried the truth, intentionally. And now that it had been unearthed, they were scared. I thought my story was over. I thought finding my birth mother, facing the pain, and rebuilding would be the hardest part. I was wrong. Because now, the real question was, why was I taken in the first place? And what secret was so terrible, it was worth threatening me to keep buried? We brought the letter to my father that evening. He read it without saying a word, his jaw tightening more with every line. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. It was no longer just worry. It was something darker. Protective. Dangerous. Who would send this? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked to the window, and stared out into the garden as if searching for a name among the shadows. There's something you both don't know, he said finally. About your mother's past. Before we met. She looked up, startled. What are you talking about? He turned to her, hesitant. Susan, you never told her about your family. About the Harts. Her face went white. I didn't think it mattered anymore, she whispered. That life, it's dead. But I wasn't about to let it go. What life? She hesitated. Her fingers gripped the armrest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Then slowly, she spoke. My father, your grandfather, was a powerful man. Not in the way you think. Not just money or influence. He had control. Over people. Over secrets. Over entire lives. I listened in stunned silence. The Hart family name opens doors in this country. But behind every door, there's something rotting. She swallowed hard. When I got pregnant with you, he was furious. Not because I was young. But because your father wasn't who he wanted. You mean my real father, I said quietly. She nodded. I never told you who he was because. I don't know. I never got his full name. It was a short summer. A reckless, wild mistake. But my father found out anyway. And when he did, he told me I'd ruined everything. That he'd handle it. I didn't know what that meant until they took you from me. She looked at me, eyes filled with old wounds and fresh terror. I think someone from my family, someone with his blood, is still watching us. My skin prickled. A long-dead patriarch. A family drunk on power. A teenage girl who defied them and paid with her child. And now someone wanted to make sure the past stayed buried. My father, my adoptive father, sat down beside us. Then we need to find out who sent this. Because if someone from the Hart family is still covering this up, they won't stop at just a letter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything I'd just learned. I had always believed I was unwanted. Unloved. But now I knew the truth. I was stolen. Hidden. My identity rewritten. And someone out there wanted me to stay forgotten. But they'd made a mistake. Because now, I wasn't the scared little girl anymore. I was ready to find out who I really was. Even if it destroyed everything. We started with what little we had, her old things, tucked away in boxes buried deep in the attic. The smell of dust and forgotten years filled the air as we opened them, one by one. Old school photos. Newspaper clippings. Letters tied in satin ribbon. And then, at the bottom of a worn leather suitcase, we found it. A journal. Faded leather, cracked with age. The initials SH were etched into the cover, Susan Hart. My mother's maiden name. She stared at it like it was a ghost come back to life. I thought I threw this away. I opened it carefully, flipping through the pages filled with messy handwriting. Most entries were normal, teenage ramblings, frustrations, love songs scribbled in the margins. Until one date stood out. June 3, 2005. That was the day I was born. The page had been torn out. But there was a second entry, dated just 3 days later. Written in shaky pen strokes. They took her. I begged them. I screamed. But they said it was the only way to protect the family name. They said if I ever spoke about her again, they'd make me disappear too. My throat closed. I looked up at her, and her eyes were already filled with tears. She hadn't known. Or maybe, she'd tried to forget. We need to go, I said. Go where? To the Hart estate. Her face turned to stone. No. You don't understand, Leah. That place, it's poison. All the more reason I have to see it. After some hesitation, she agreed to take me. The estate was 3 hours outside the city. Hidden behind wrought iron gates and a row of ancient pine trees. It looked more like a fortress than a home, cold, looming, untouched by time. No one greeted us. She led me inside with a hand that trembled at the doorknob. Marble floors. Chandeliers. Portraits of stern-faced men with eyes that followed you wherever you stood. My blood ran cold. We found him in the back drawing room, Uncle Richard, my grandfather's younger brother. He hadn't aged well. His body was frail, but his eyes still gleamed with calculation. He smiled when he saw my mother. Well, well. Look who the wind dragged in. Then his gaze fell on me. And froze. For a moment, it was like the world stopped spinning. His jaw clenched. His knuckles went white around his glass of brandy. You brought her here, he said slowly. My mother stood tall. She deserves to know. She was never supposed to come back, he hissed. I stepped forward. You know who I am, don't you? He didn't answer. But the silence screamed yes. I want the truth, I said. What really happened to me? Who took me? And why? He sipped his drink, the glass trembling slightly. You were a problem, he said, almost too casually. An accident that could have destroyed everything your grandfather built. He paid a woman at the clinic to say you died. Arranged for a closed file. You were sent away to an orphanage in another province. Forgotten. Why? My voice broke. Why do all that to a baby? Because you were illegitimate, he spat. A stain. You had no place in this family. My mother stepped forward then, fury in her voice. She was my daughter. Not a secret to be buried. He scoffed. Your father was ruthless, Susan. You know that. He did what he thought was necessary. I stared at him. Did you send the letter? He didn't answer. But something in his expression shifted, just enough to know I was close to the truth. I'm not afraid of you, I said. Not anymore. He leaned forward slowly. You should be. You've stirred up old blood. And old blood doesn't die quietly. We left before things escalated. But I knew now, I was getting close. Too close. And someone was watching. Because that night, when we got home, our front door was wide open. And everything inside was ransacked. Drawers emptied. Papers gone. The journal missing. But there, taped to the shattered mirror in the hallway, was another note. Leave it alone, Leah. Last warning. I stared at my reflection, cracked and broken across the glass. They wanted me silent. But I was just getting started. The next morning, I dug through the few documents we had left. Most of the names from the clinic had been blacked out in old records, but I found one, barely legible, buried in the margin of a consent form from 2005. Margaret Hale, RN. It was a long shot. But it was all I had. With some digging, I found an address. A retirement home on the edge of the city. I didn't tell anyone I was going, just left a note for my parents in case something went wrong. I didn't want to drag them further into this mess. When I arrived, I almost turned around. The building looked quiet, too quiet, like time had stopped around it. Inside, a nurse led me to a small room with faded wallpaper and a window overlooking a dying garden. Margaret Hale was sitting in a wheelchair, knitting. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes were sharp the moment she looked up at me. I've been expecting you, she said softly. I froze. You know who I am? She gave a slow, sad nod. I always wondered if you'd find your way back. I sat down. My throat was dry. Why didn't you speak up? Why did you help them take me? Her hands paused mid-knit. Because I didn't have a choice. Your grandfather, Samuel Hart, he owned half the clinic. He paid people to lie, to falsify documents. He threatened my son. Said he'd make him disappear if I didn't cooperate. A wave of nausea crashed through me. I was there when you were born, she continued. Your mother, Susan, was young, scared. But she begged to see you. Held you for just 30 seconds before they ripped you from her arms. She wiped a tear from her cheek. I watched them place you in a carrier and drive off with you that night. No records. No adoption file. Nothing. I swallowed hard. Do you know where they took me? She nodded slowly. A woman named Mrs. Alden. She ran a private orphanage in the countryside. Off the books. She was paid to keep you hidden. My heart pounded. Do you know if she's still alive? I doubt it, Margaret said, voice low. But someone else might be. She had a son, Theodore. He used to help her. Quiet type. Smart. If anyone knows what happened to you between then and now, it's him. She reached for a small box on her nightstand and pulled out an old photo, two women standing in front of a farmhouse, one holding a baby wrapped in pink. That's you, she whispered. I kept this all these years. I hoped, one day, you'd come back to ask for it. I took the photo with trembling hands. And then she said something that chilled me to my core. Be careful, Leah. There's more to this than you know. Samuel Hart was just the beginning. He had partners. Powerful ones. Men who made sure inconvenient children like you vanished. I left that retirement home shaking. The truth was clearer now, but it came with a heavier price. I wasn't just a stolen child. I was a threat to people who built empires on silence. As I walked back to my car, I noticed a black sedan idling across the street. Tinted windows. Engine running. I didn't wait to see who was inside. I drove straight home and locked the doors. Then I took out the photo again. On the back, someone had scribbled an address. Alden Farm. Pine Brook Valley. That night, I made a decision. If no one else would finish this, I would. Even if it meant confronting the shadows that stole my name. Pine Brook Valley was nothing like the city. The roads narrowed into cracked asphalt lined with wild grass, and the trees leaned in so close it felt like the forest itself was watching me. As I followed the address Margaret gave me, I couldn't shake the feeling that every mile brought me closer not just to answers, but to danger. I found the farmhouse at the end of a dirt road, hidden behind a rusted gate and an overgrown hedge. It was old, sagging at the corners, with peeling white paint and a porch that looked like it hadn't seen life in years. But someone had been there recently. There were tire tracks in the dirt. I stepped out of the car, heart pounding in my ears, and walked up to the porch. The wind creaked the old swing as I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Hello? I'm looking for Theodore Alden. Still nothing. I was about to turn back when the door creaked open. He stood in the doorway. Mid-40s. Gaunt, quiet eyes, like someone who'd seen too much of the world and decided to stop looking. He didn't speak, just stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You're her, aren't you?" I froze. Her? He nodded. The girl they called Leah. You lived here for 2 years. You don't remember, do you? I shook my head slowly. My mind spun. 2 years? I had no memory of this place. I was just a teenager, he continued. My mother kept you out of sight. Said it was for your protection. But I remember you. Big eyes. Always quiet. Always watching. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Why was I here? He stepped aside. Come in. The inside was as dusty and faded as the outside. Old photographs. A wood-burning stove. A long hallway filled with closed doors. He led me to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water before sitting across from me at the table. My mother wasn't evil, he said. She took in children that people didn't want the world to see. Children born from shame. From affairs. From scandals. I flinched. She was paid to keep them hidden. No names. No questions. I stared down at the glass in my hands. What happened to me after I left here? He hesitated. That's the thing, he said. One day, a man came. Said he was a lawyer. Brought adoption papers. But something about him was off. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. I never saw my mother so nervous. I held my breath. He took you. That was the last time I saw you. The next week, my mother closed the place down. Burned every file. Said it was over. She died not long after. Heart attack. I looked up, searching his eyes. Do you remember the man's name? He nodded slowly. He said he worked for the Hearts. And just like that, the web tightened again. I stood. I need to find him. I need to know who he was. Theodore didn't stop me. But as I turned to go, he called out, "Be careful, Leah." I paused. There's a reason people like you disappear. You carry stories the world was never meant to hear. I drove back with my mind on fire. Back to the Hart estate. Back to the ghosts I was finally ready to face. Because now, I had the last piece of the puzzle. A name. A photo. And the truth. I wasn't just a girl who got lost. I was the secret the Hart family tried to erase. And now, I was going to make them remember me. I didn't knock this time. I stormed through the front gates of the Hart estate like I belonged there, because in a way, I did. I was their blood. Their shame. Their secret they thought had vanished into the void. But I was back, and I wasn't leaving until they looked me in the eye and said my name. The butler recognized me instantly and stepped aside without a word. I found Uncle Richard in the study, swirling a glass of whiskey like always, a fire crackling behind him as if it were some dramatic prop he'd ordered just for effect. He didn't flinch when I entered. "You look more like her every day," he said without turning around. "Your lies are falling apart," I snapped. "I know everything now. About Margaret Hale. About Alden Farm. About the man you sent to take me." He finally turned. "You've been busy." "Too busy to play nice anymore," I said, tossing the photo on his desk. The one of me as a baby, wrapped in a pink blanket outside the Alden house. "This ends now." Richard stared at the image. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that looked like regret. But it vanished quickly, swallowed by the cold, calculated man he had always been. "You think you're going to take us down?" he asked. "You're one girl. With no real name. No proof." I pulled out my phone. "Wrong. I have the journal. Scan every page before it disappeared. I have audio from Margaret before she died. And I have this." I tapped the screen. A video began to play. It was Theodore Alden's recorded testimony, time-stamped, clear, and damning. He listed dates. Names. Payments. The lawyer who forged the adoption. The clinic paid to erase me. Everything. "You wouldn't dare release that," Richard growled. "You'd destroy your own family name." "I don't want your name," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I want your truth. And if you think for 1 second I'm afraid of you anymore, then you haven't been paying attention." He slammed his fist onto the desk. "You ungrateful little." "You tried to erase me," I interrupted. "But I survived. I found my mother. I found myself. And now, if you don't make this right, I will burn your entire legacy to the ground." He was silent. Because he knew I could. "You'll get a settlement," he finally muttered. "A private agreement. Name whatever figure you want." I took a step forward. "I don't want your money. I want my mother's name restored. I want my adoption file reopened. I want the public to know the truth about the Hart family. About what you did to girls like me. And I want your public apology, on record." He stared at me, face drained of color. "And if I refuse," he said coldly. I smiled. "Then I press send. And your legacy becomes a scandal headline by tomorrow morning." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Then, slowly, Richard sat down. "I always knew you'd come back one day," he whispered. "You were too stubborn to disappear." I leaned in. "I didn't come back to be part of your world. I came back to end it. 1 month later, the headlines hit. Heiress found, long-lost daughter of billionaire family uncovers dark secrets. Susan Hart and daughter reunited after 18 years of silence and scandal. Richard resigned from all public roles. The Hart Foundation pledged millions to women's shelters and adoption reform programs, public repentance for a legacy built on secrecy and power. But none of it mattered as much as one small, quiet thing. My mother, holding my hand in front of a courthouse, whispering, "I'm proud of you." I wasn't a shadow anymore. I wasn't a burden. I was Leah Hart. The girl who came back from the dead. And this time, I was finally seen. 5 years later. The wind smelled like salt and spring rain. I stood barefoot on the porch of a small cottage by the sea, watching the waves roll in under a sky bruised with twilight. My dog, Willow, a scruffy rescue with too much personality and not enough manners, rested her head on my feet. Inside, my mother was humming softly in the kitchen, the scent of lemon tea and warm bread curling through the open door behind me. She'd aged in the last few years, not in the way time wears a person down, but in the way healing softens sharp edges. We both had. After the court case and the headlines and the fury died down, we left the city. She sold her shares in the Hart name, donated most of it, and used the rest to buy this quiet piece of coastline where no one knew our story, and no one cared. And me? I wrote memoirs. Fiction. Op-eds on the rights of adopted children and the invisible scars of erasure. People read them. Some sent letters. Others showed up at readings, eyes full of unshed tears, telling me my story helped them face their own. But more than anything, I finally felt whole. One afternoon, while clearing out old boxes, I found a copy of my birth certificate. The legal one, reissued after everything was cleared. Under mother, Susan Hart. Under father, unknown. Under name, Leah Grace Hart. Grace. It wasn't a name I'd chosen. But when I saw it, I didn't feel the urge to change it. It was the first gift I'd ever been given by someone who loved me from the moment I existed, even if the world tried to erase that love. I kept it. Later that evening, I sat beside my mother under a sky full of stars, our mugs warm between our palms. "You ever think about the past?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Every day. But it doesn't haunt me anymore." "Do you regret it?" I whispered. She was quiet for a long time. Then she turned to me. "No," she said. "Because even through all the mistakes, all the pain, you found your way back to me." She reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, something she never got to do when I was a child. And I let her. Because I wasn't her lost daughter anymore. I was her found one. And sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't the ones we write. They're the ones we survive.